You never heard them raise their voice, not once. And that's exactly why it took you so long to notice you were being controlled. You keep replaying it in your head, looking for the moment they crossed a line, a slammed door, a cruel word, something loud enough to point to and say, "There, that's where it started." But there's nothing like that to find, just a long string of quiet moments that somehow left you smaller than you used to be. This is the part almost nobody tells you about narcissistic control. It doesn't shout. It doesn't have to. Volume is for people who haven't learned subtler tools yet. Here's the trap. You were taught, like most people, to watch for aggression. Raised voices, slammed doors, direct threats. Your nervous system is wired to flag those as danger. But quiet control was built to slide underneath that wiring entirely. It uses warmth as a weapon, silence as a punishment, and your own self-doubt as the delivery mechanism. By the time you'd recognize a shout, the damage from the silence is already done. Think about the last time someone went cold on you without explanation. No fight, no accusation. Just a sudden drop in warmth, a shorter reply than usual, a smile that didn't quite arrive. You probably spent the next hour scanning your own behavior. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? That scanning is the entire mechanism. You did the controlling work yourself, in your own head, without them ever needing to say a word. Psychologist Craig Malkin, who has spent decades studying narcissism, describes this as one of the central paradoxes of covert control. The person doesn't need to attack you directly when they can simply withdraw warmth and let your own anxiety fill in the blanks. Your mind, desperate to restore connection, starts auditing itself for the offense. Most of the time, there isn't one. The withdrawal was never about you. It was a lever, and you just pulled it on yourself. Why does this work better than shouting ever could? Because shouting gives you something to defend against. Cold silence gives you nothing but your own imagination. And your imagination is always harsher than reality. Watch how the pattern escalates once it starts working. First comes the subtle comparison. A passing mention of someone else who handles things so much better than you do, said lightly, almost as a compliment to the other person, never framed as criticism of you. You laugh it off, but some part of you starts performing for an audience that's already decided you're falling short. Then comes the conditional warmth, affection that shows up only after you've done something they wanted, a reward for compliance, withheld the moment you assert a boundary. You begin, without realizing it, shaping your behavior around their approval, not because they demanded it, because you're chasing the warmth that disappeared, and you've started believing it's your job to earn it back. Researcher Jean Twenge, who has written extensively on narcissistic traits, points to a pattern underneath all of this. People with high narcissistic traits tend to treat relationships as systems to be managed rather than partnerships to be shared. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to maintain image, extract admiration, or test loyalty, and the people around them often don't notice they're being managed until they're already deep inside the system. Here's where it gets quieter still. Triangulation. A third person, real or implied, brought into the conversation just enough to make you feel replaceable. They don't say, "I'll leave you for someone better." They don't have to. A mention of someone else's effortless patience, someone else's easy temperament, dropped into an unrelated conversation, plants the same fear without a single direct threat ever being made. You can't even confront it. There's nothing to point to. Just a feeling that you're being quietly measured against someone who isn't even in the room. And underneath all of it sits something psychologist W. Campbell has documented in his research on narcissism. People high in narcissistic traits are often remarkably skilled at appearing reasonable, even generous, while steadily reshaping the people around them to serve their need for admiration and control. The skill isn't cruelty, it's calibration. Just enough warmth to keep you reaching, just enough distance to keep you anxious. The silent treatment deserves its own attention here, because it's perhaps the purest version of volume-free control. No accusation is made, no demand is stated. The only message delivered is absence itself, and absence is uniquely difficult to argue with. You can't counter a point that was never spoken. You can't apologize for an offense that was never named. All you can do is sit inside the discomfort until it becomes unbearable enough that you're the one who breaks the silence, usually by apologizing for something you're still not sure you did. That apology, offered into a vacuum, is often the entire goal, Not because they need to hear sorry, because the apology confirms, once again, that you'll do the emotional labor of repair so they never have to. Why does it feel impossible to explain to anyone else? Because nothing they did would sound bad if you said it out loud. They went quiet for a day. They mentioned someone else's patience. They smiled less than usual. Spoken aloud, none of it sounds like control. That's the entire design. Loud cruelty leaves evidence. Quiet cruelty leaves only your own exhaustion, which is easy for everyone, including you, to dismiss as overreacting. Think about where this shows up. In a relationship where you've started rehearsing conversations in your head before you have them, trying to predict which version of them will answer. In a friendship where you've quietly stopped sharing good news because their reaction never quite matches the size of your joy. In a family where one person's mood sets the temperature for an entire room, and everyone else has learned, without ever being told, to manage it. In families, this often gets passed down as a kind of inheritance. One parent who never explodes, who never needs to, because everyone in the house has learned to read the smallest shift in tone and adjust before anything is said. Children raised in that environment often grow into adults who are skilled at managing other people's moods and strangely unable to identify their own. At work, it looks like a manager who never criticizes you directly, but who somehow makes you feel that your best effort is always slightly insufficient. Praise arrives rarely enough that you remember each instance for weeks. Criticism arrives as a sigh, a pause before responding, a slightly too long silence after you've finished speaking. Nothing you could quote in a complaint, everything you can feel in your chest by Friday. It shows up in romantic relationships. As a kind of weather system, you start checking before you speak. You learn the signs of an approaching cold front and adjust your plans, your tone, even your good news, around a forecast nobody ever announced out loud. So how do you actually see it once you suspect it's happening? Track the gap between what was said and how you felt afterward. If small, deniable moments keep leaving you anxious or smaller than before, the absence of an obvious offense doesn't mean nothing happened. Quiet control is built to leave no obvious offense. The feeling is the evidence. Stop auditing yourself first. When warmth disappears without explanation, your instinct will be to search your own behavior for the cause. Resist that instinct, at least long enough to ask a second question. Has this happened before, in this exact shape, after I did something independent of them? If the cold spells reliably follow your moments of autonomy, that's not a coincidence you need to keep explaining away. Name the triangulation when it happens. You don't need to accuse anyone of anything. You can simply notice, out loud or to yourself, that a comparison was made, and that comparisons are rarely accidental when they recur. Once you can name a pattern, it loses some of its power to operate on you unnoticed. Give yourself permission to test the warmth instead of chasing it. If affection only ever shows up after compliance, try holding a small boundary and watching what happens to the temperature in the room. You're not trying to start a conflict. You're trying to gather honest information about whether the warmth was ever about you at all, or whether it was always a mechanism for getting something from you, and measure the relationship by its full shape, not its best 5 minutes. Quiet control survives because the warm moments are real enough to keep you hoping the cold ones were the exception. They're not. They're the method. And the warmth is simply the part designed to keep you in the room for it. None of this means quiet people are dangerous, or that every cold mood hides a hidden agenda. Most silence is exactly what it looks like, a person who needs space, processing something that has nothing to do with you. The difference was never in the volume, it was always in the pattern. Reasonable silence can survive a direct, calm conversation about what it meant. Calculated silence rarely can, because naming it removes the very deniability it depends on. Watch what happens when you ask plainly what a particular silence was about. The answer, or the refusal to give one, tells you almost everything you need to know. You'll hear it again sometime soon, not a raised voice, just a slight drop in temperature, right after you did something for yourself instead of for them. And this time, instead of spending the next hour auditing your own behavior, you'll recognize the shape of what's actually happening. The silence was never about what you did wrong. It was never loud enough to need a reason at all.